Before we begin today, I just want to say congratulations to Halle Bailey, who was just cast as Ariel in The Little Mermaid. I'm so happy that they race-bended this character, and I can't wait to see what they do with the rest of it. Who they're going to cast as Sebastian, who they're going to cast as King Triton, Flounder, Eric, Prince Eric.
Her name is Ariel.
That would be really cool. But yeah, congratulations to her. Spiderman, Spiderman, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web anytime, but look out! Here comes the Spider-Man, yeah! So today we're going to talk about Avengers Endgame. Just kidding, we're going to talk about Spider-Man Far From Home. It came out yesterday, it's supposed to be the summer blockbuster hit from Marvel. We actually don't have another Marvel movie coming out until May of 2020. This is coming off after Avengers Endgame, which almost hit $3 billion, is the second highest grossing movie of all time, which is crazy, and then this movie has a lot to live up to, and it's essentially kicking off phase 4 of what Marvel has in store for us. There's so much to talk about. I will say that for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, I will just say this: you need to watch this movie and then come back and watch this review, because it's very hard. I've seen like other people do like non-spoiler reviews. It's very hard to even talk about this movie without spoiling anything, because the trailers don't do it justice. That's all I will say. Yeah, that's all I'll say. Anyway, go watch it, come back, and then we'll talk about the spoilers. So, let's split it up into the same 3 sections that we do in all of these reviews, which are the stuff that I thought were really awesome. I've titled it Stuff That You'd Find in Your Friendly Neighborhood, the stuff that I thought could use a little bit more work or were a bit sticky, and lastly, the things that I would improve in the movie, which I've titled Far From Home Base. Enough talking, let's jump straight into it. Oh, and I will just say this before I forget. I know at the end of the video you're supposed to say, oh, if you like it, make sure to like and subscribe and all that stuff. I always forget to say that in all of my videos, so I'm just gonna say it here. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, and it really helps me out so much, because YouTube is not just like, oh, did you personally like it? They want to recommend it to other people, so it's like a whole algorithm. It's just like a computer like this. It's like, oh, one more like for this video, we should send it to someone else. So if you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, because it really helps out with the algorithm. I put in a ton of work into these videos. I literally have like 3,000 words written out in my notes. As a fellow Peter who lives in New York City, who's also a photographer, I guess I'm also wearing similar clothing to his own Spider-Man costume. So enough talking, let's jump straight into it. Spider-Man Far From Home. So this picks up right after Avengers Endgame. They explain to us that the Thanos snap has been termed the blip, because the people who weren't actually there to see that it was a snap just know that people just blipped out of existence. So the civilians who remained aged 5 years, and everyone who came back into existence stayed the same age. So they have just people who grew out of their class or people who entered their class. They kind of use it as a comedic element, because they show that there was a flashback where 5 years ago there was a band playing and people start just mysteriously dusting away, like we remember from the Thanos snap. And then it fast forwards to a basketball game and the same band player just like appear on the court, and it was just like, what the heck? I never thought it was like a ghost. Spider-Man Far From Home made an attempt to make it a little lighthearted, to remind us, yes, this is picking up after it, but we're trying to make this a little less heavy as it was in the past. So this movie had 2 main plot points. It had Peter's plot points as well as Spider-Man's plot points. So Peter in this movie, his whole thing from the very beginning was told to us, he's trying to, while they're on this trip in Europe, get to talk to MJ and tell her how he really feels. Meanwhile, Spider-Man's journey in this movie is about trying to figure out what his place is, especially considering that Iron Man just died. And both are connected, and they both like kind of split Peter up, where he's trying to live a normal life, but having to fulfill his responsibilities as Spider-Man and as an Avenger now. The other thing I'd say about this movie, it wasn't actually like a 3-act movie. It kind of felt like it was just like a first half and a second half, where the first half was less exciting than the second half. The first half had a very heavy, just like teen comedy, romantic vibes, where like the story was going to other countries, and like little awkward conversations or situations that happened. And I was like, okay, like Spider-Man would show up every so often, but there wasn't like major action scenes. There were some action scenes, but like once a moment happened in the movie, it kind of felt like the movie was winding down at the end of its first half, and it was just like, okay, well, where are we gonna go from here? It seems like the movie's end. And then one scene happened, and it was the scene where Peter gives E.D.I.T.H to Mysterio, and it was from that point on until the end of the movie that I felt the most entertained. I felt the trailers misguided us, and the synopsis misguided us, and no one could have predicted what would have happened. Even though we kind of knew that he was going to be a bad guy, we didn't really know how he would be a bad guy. Especially because they tried to trick us with the multiverse thing. Oh my gosh, so many thoughts. But on the plane, Peter tries to sit next to MJ, and then he tells Ned to help him out. And the whole perfume allergy scene was just really funny, because the teacher just like overreacts, and I was like, this guy seems like he would be the one. And he rearranges all their seats to the point where not only is Peter not sitting next to MJ, but the guy who like aged up, Brad, is sitting next to her, who's like the other love interest of MJ, and then Peter ends up sitting next to the teacher, and then it goes even further to have Brad bring out the dual headphone adapter, and he's like, oh, we can listen to movies together, to MJ, and then Peter's holding his in his hand, the teacher just looks at him, he's like, oh, you have a dual headphone adapter? That's great, we can watch movies together. I was like, this is the worst possible outcome that could have happened to this character. So I was just like, the comedy was really on point in this movie. As they're sitting next to each other, in the background, you just hear the teacher telling Peter, you know, I have a story about the blip. My wife fake blipped, and we're like, what? She just wanted to run off with another man, so she didn't come home one day, and I thought that she died. We had a funeral for her. And it was just like so funny that he's just saying this in the background as Peter's just like thinking about the dual adapter. And Edith is introduced to the story. She is an AI that Tony built for Peter, and she like lived in the glasses that look like Tony's glasses. She stands for Even Dead, I Am the Hero. Even Dead, I'm the Hero. The thing that's really important about Edith is I don't think anyone could predict how crucial she is to the plot. You might think, oh, she'll come in handy for like the winning battle, but with how critical she is and how long actually she's been around, and we didn't even know that in the MCU. It's really impressive. The tie into how the people who created her were an anti-Tony secret mob, and they knew of her capabilities was just like an astounding thing because it was a real threat. It also added an element of revenge. But not just revenge, it was revenge against a superhero, like Tony. They were all against Tony. And that's really cool. We don't really see that, where the people come together against the superhero. I mean, we saw it in Homecoming, where Vulture was like against Tony for displacing him from his job of scavenging. We'll get back to the Vulture as well as the whole thematic element of this movie. It's really like, sorry, there are fireworks happening outside because it's 4th of July. Happy 4th of July. This is the first movie post Tony's death in Endgame. And while many are mourning his loss and everyone's still recovering, this sought to add the dimension of those that he mistreated. And when that moment clicked during Jake Gyllenhaal's exposition speech, my audience oohed in a way that like they sounded like they were siding with Beck. Like, how dare Tony do that? Also, how have we not picked that up, that this was technology that was available in MCU this entire time? One thing I will say about Edith, though, is while I was writing my notes, I got to thinking, does she have unlimited drones? Especially when we're talking about the ending. Can she just like create as many and inside the whole satellite system? She just constantly manufacturing them as she keeps going. That was just something I started thinking about because I wanted to know how long this spaceship satellite Edith thing could exist on in the MCU. And the other thing I started thinking about was, where was Edith during Endgame? She's so powerful, and having access to a voice-controlled, airborne, missile army of drones, that would have been like super helpful in Endgame, don't you think? Also, when was Edith built? I'm gonna assume pre-Infinity War because Nick Fury told Peter that Tony built this for you. And it doesn't seem like he would have been building it throughout the 5-year blip because he didn't know if Peter was coming back. So it must have been pre-Infinity War. And if it were pre-Infinity War, why did he never call her during Infinity War or during Endgame? Like, if that wasn't an emergency 10 years in the making, you know, Endgame, Infinity War, then what is? So it kind of felt like a silver bullet that was added to this story to continue Tony's legacy, but also to kind of make the story more intricate and involved in a grand scheme kind of thing. It was cool. Where did she come from? I would like a deeper explanation of when she was built. Why wasn't she involved in other movies? If you know, write it down below. So when do you think she was built? And also, when do you think Tony wrote that note? From the moment Peter came back, Iron Man was fighting Thanos to the moment that Iron Man died. So at what point did he write that note, unless he wrote it pre-blip and just like kept it, but then why would he give it to Nick Fury if he didn't even see Nick Fury until... Actually, he didn't see Nick Fury, he was dead. I don't know at what point Tony created Edith, at what point he wrote the note, and what point he gave Nick Fury the glasses. And it seemed like it must have happened pre-Endgame, and if it happened pre-Endgame, then why was it not used in Endgame? If you have any thoughts, write them down below. This is a spoiled territory. We can talk about anything we want here. I will say that the exact moment when the second half of the movie began was when Peter handed Edith to Quentin Beck, or Mysterio. Side note, it's pretty clever to have the Italian news be the one that's covering the story initially of Mysterio, so that it's not just like Mysterio's named the villain, it's just like, oh, he is the mystery man, and in Italian it's Mysterio. So it's like, oh, he's Mysterio, and everyone's like, oh, so his name is Mysterio. That's interesting. And once he gets Edith, oh my gosh, I really want to just watch people's reactions to that scene, because I don't think anyone could have predicted what happened in this movie, and that scene specifically was the turning point. That's when I think Act 1 ended with the semi-slow, like, high school heartthrob kind of elements, and began a real, like, action-packed thriller. The trailers purposefully left it out, and I don't know if it's going to be to this movie's disadvantage, because I don't know how many people are going to watch it. You let me know, are you going to go watch this movie? I watched it, and I think it's awesome, but I don't know if everyone thinks that this is as high stakes, because they kind of sold it as like a high school teen trip. But it's not. It's so much more. It's so much more than that. That scene with the holograms dropping and some people remaining was just so, wow. It was. My brain could not even process what was happening. I was like, why are people disappearing? Oh, everyone's disappearing. It's all an illusion. But then some people were staying, and I was like, why are some people staying? And then it zoomed into Jake Gyllenhaal's face, and he does like that laugh, and he's just like celebrating. I'm like, what is going on? I don't get any of this. And it was perfect. I love that feeling, because that is what entertainment is. That when you, as an audience member, can't predict what's happening, you just are sitting there in awe and confusion, but just like, what? Tell me what's happening. I need the story to keep going, keep the story going. Like, those are the best moments in cinematic history, and that was one of them, where I really was not prepared for what was going to happen, and it was such a powerful scene. As the people in the bar began fading in blue, the holograms, which was actually kind of reminiscent of the snap from Thanos. Yes, Quentin Beck is actually a former employee of Stark Industries who was fired by Tony, and his team is comprised of fellow anti-Tony believers. Which is coming off the heels of Endgame, where Tony made this massive sacrifice, and they're like, it wasn't all that good, and you're just like, wow, we're going there. Tony was kind of in his head, or really mistreating his employees. He named this hard work of this employee Barf, and that was what we were initially introduced to, and it was kind of comedic when we first saw it, but wow, that was just a really good plug. And then they also featured the same scientist who was yelled at by Obadiah. That same guy who got yelled at was also anti-Tony. I will say I actually was on board largely with the speech that Jake Gyllenhaal gave. Tony mistreated them and made fun of their intellect and their advancements and hard work, and then he fired them. Anyone would be upset if that happened to them. He went on to say how everyone waits for superheroes nowadays, but now it's the time for, and I really thought he was going to say science to save us, which I got super geeked out about, because I thought, is this movie really going to tackle science versus superheroes, and like how scientists are superheroes, which is such a phenomenal thesis statement for a movie, especially when they mentioned a comment about how they study Thor in physics class. I was ready to see where this geek versus hero story would take us, especially considering that Peter Parker and Tony Stark are both scientists themselves and superheroes. So I was willing to see, like, I mean, effectively, Tony Stark is just a scientist who happens to have a really cool science experiment that made him a superhero. So I was like, is this movie gonna really talk about how the smart people who've been powering Stark Industries can really just become superheroes on their own and like mass produce superhero equipment or superhero technology? That's where I thought we were gonna go. But then he went on to talk about how he wanted high casualties, because the higher the casualty rate, the greater the threat, and then the greater the superhero is seen. And I was like, why? Why must we do this? It was a classic MCU thing, where they're largely comedic movies with amazing action sequences, but once they introduce a complex villain with deep motives and even like good intentions that you might agree with as an audience member, they convince you that they're still the bad guy because they want to kill people, and killing people is wrong. Kind of like, hey-oh, that speech was really good and poetic and stuff, and you know, you might agree with them, but they are okay with murder. So they're the bad guy. Looks like Spider-Man has to be the good guy and take them down. Which, why do that? And not only does Spider-Man need to stop him, but Tony is still right. But Tony's title does not excuse him from the abuse of his employees. He cannot use his authority to put other people down, even if he is the CEO, even if he is Iron Man. And now that we've seen this side of him that we didn't know existed, why would you open this up and not explore it more? Because you're giving us a bad taste in our mouths for Tony. The villain do bad things, so clearly the villain's also wrong, but that doesn't excuse the wrongness that Tony did himself. It would have been cool to explore that concept, or at least have Peter learn from it in his own journey to becoming a superhero. But introducing this concept post-Iron Man's death and not addressing it taints Tony's image. A billionaire who mistreated his or her employees would literally trend on Twitter today. Also, while we're here, there was a great YouTube video that I saw about how Thanos needed to act because the Avengers and everyone else who had the Infinity Stones kept them locked away instead of using them to help others with their infinite powers. And the point in the movie that I love, it was on par with the fight scenes from the end of Endgame. Just really breathtaking visuals. After Peter figures out that Mysterio is a bad guy, we enter into one of the most breathtaking action sequences in any movie. really, it's the stuff out of comics, and the visual effects team really needs to, you know, take the prize home on this one. This was so expertly done, and your brain was just taken for a ride. I was so engrossed in what was happening on the screen that if like an actual tornado or if Mysterio himself like broke through my cinema and just like broke through the other side, I would not have even noticed, because what was happening on screen was tantalizing. I'm talking about the scene where there were a lot of mirrors and a lot of Spider-Mans, and when Iron Man came out of the grave, that's the one I'm talking about. The visuals were so intricate and jaw-dropping, with like an element of mysticism to a degree that was amplified because they weren't just illusions, but they were interactions with the actual environment around them. So they were just holograms masked over the real world. So you didn't know when a mirror crashing onto Peter would just transition into smoke, or it would transition into an actual car that smashed into him. So that just kept you on your toes in your brain, just really trying to think, oh, is this one gonna hurt? Oh, it didn't this one hurt? Which is so comics accurate, because that's what I anticipated Mysterio would fight like. Then when Nick Fury finally saves Peter by shooting Mysterio, and then he asks Peter who he told about Mysterio, but it turns out to just be another illusion, my brain was thinking, oh my gosh, we can't trust anyone anymore. My whole theater gasped, and before we could even process the kind of grave challenge that was ahead of Peter of trying to like decipher or figure out who he could trust and who he couldn't, a train pummels into Spider-Man and takes him away. Also, was that Nick Fury who got injured earlier on in that scene by Mysterio? I couldn't tell with all the holograms. I know Maria Hill faded away, but I think that was actually Nick Fury. We'll talk about Nick Fury more later on, but it was believable when Mysterio was acting like Nick Fury to find out who Peter told in his class, because throughout the whole movie, Nick Fury kind of had a harshness to him that wasn't there in other movies, kind of like he was very business-centric. I believe that it actually was him, and so when it turned out to be Mysterio, I was like, well, you sold it, because whether you're the villain or Nick Fury, you probably would have been that harsh to Peter Parker. And after the bullet train hit Peter, I thought he was going to need more time to heal, because that sound effect was so realistic and it made it sound like his entire body was cracked into. But he just like wakes up in the Netherlands in jail, and there are more jokes about just the friendly culture of the people from the Netherlands, and then the joke about the city that he's in. It was absolutely beautiful. Peter was far from home at many locations in this movie in Europe, but the scene in the Netherlands with all those flowers, those colorful flowers, if I could pick only one, I would pick that flower bed place with all the colors. It was so beautiful. And because of that, this is where I would introduce some of the things I would change in the movie. So Peter made a mistake and caused the villain to get more strong, and then he fought the villain and lost. And he's finally in a country that he doesn't even know where. This is the most fragile moment of the entire movie. This is when Spider-Man is the most broken. And because of that, I would have used this scene to hammer home the gravity of the situation. It would have been really cool to do it, especially here, because the scene was already very beautiful and sunny and flowery, so you could use the juxtaposition of a really beautiful setting to talk about a really hard topic, which is Spider-Man and his failure. So it was a very tender moment, but when Happy comes off the plane, he's like, tell me something only you would know. And then Happy starts talking about how Peter rented an adult film in a theater. He's like, okay, forget it. I was like, why must we make everything like comedic? And then they just went back into the plane. They talked about how Peter was missing Tony. It was a very good scene. Exactly where are we going? Because the plane's been hovering for 15 minutes. And I was like, well, if the plane's been hovering for 15 minutes, why didn't they just do this scene outside? This is about being far from home, so why not use the beautiful landscape that we already have of the Netherlands, where Peter is literally the furthest from home, because it's not even a place he was planning to go to on his trip. This is just really out of bounds for him. And he doesn't even know who to trust, so that's even more out of bounds for him, especially for this like little high school kid from Queens. So they could have kept him outside in the field and then done this scene. So I did some more thinking about it, and I wrote like how I would have handled it. Here's how I would have had that scene go. As Happy arrives getting out of the plane, Peter is walking a little slowly because he's still in pain recovering from the London train. Oh, that all rhymed. Then he winces and drops to the floor. Happy sees this and he starts running towards Peter, and Peter's like, no, stop! And he puts up his fingers like he's about to shoot him, because he really doesn't know who to trust anymore. And all we see is, I know you're seeing me, but I'm saying, imagine this angle, where like the camera's here and shooting out this way, and all you see is the fingers. And then all you see is Happy in the distance, above his fingers. And he's like, tell me something only you would know. And he's holding on. He's really about to just take Happy down because he doesn't know who to trust anymore. And then Happy, realizing the gravity of the situation, instead of making a joke, he says, I love your Aunt May. I know it's something I've been hiding from you, but this is something that and he just keeps on talking about the Aunt May thing, And Peter realizes that this is Happy, and so he becomes a little bit happy, but also it dawns on him even more that he has lost total control of his life, professionally and personally. He can't even go out with his friends anymore without putting them in danger. He hasn't been able to tell MJ how he feels about her. Ned has been able to find a love interest. Brad is fighting against him to get MJ's interest. Even Happy and May have found love, and he's just by himself and needing to be pushed to an extreme to be Iron Man, even though he doesn't feel capable. And in his insecurity, he made his worst villain, Mysterio, with tech that his only father figure in his life, Tony Stark, gave him. So he is just at an all-time low, and then he's just laying there as Happy just continues talking. And all we see is the camera becomes a wide angle, and we just see the flowers, as well as Peter crouched amongst the flowers, Happy on the left with the plane. And there's silence. And all we hear is crying. It's Peter Parker crying. His life is so out of control. And it finally dawns on us, he is so far from home in more than one way. And Happy realizes what's going on. Back to the shot of the fingers, and we see the blurry figure, Happy, approaching. Happy kneels, and despite Peter still being ready to take him down, he trusts him and holds onto his hand and pulls Peter in for a hug amongst the beautiful flowers of Netherlands. Then they have the hero convo. Peter, it'll be okay. Don't tell me it'll be okay. I failed. I messed up. Mysterio's all my fault. He realizes that he snapped at Happy, the only other father figure in his life. I'm sorry, I just really miss him. To which Happy says, I miss him too. They're both still kneeling amongst the flowers. We get a breeze on the top. Some petals fly across them. You know, Tony would not have done that if he didn't know you would be around after him. And then the story continues on to whatever it needs to go. But why not do that hero convo outside amongst the flowers? And ultimately because they were hovering over the flowers anyway. Some other quick thoughts I just want to add in here really quickly. The movie broke traditional MCU formula by not having a major fight scene within the first, 10-15 minutes. We had, a mini preview of Mysterio finding one of the elementals, but it wasn't a fleshed out action scene, it was just, the intro to it. Why did Peter jump out of the bus to stop the drone that he accidentally sent after Brad when Edith is voice commanded? He could have said, she was asking him, do you want me to stop it? And he just, jumped up and shot the web at it, which... if he would have jumped out, the bus would have kept on going and he would have just landed on the ground. Did Quentin Beck not have to confirm transfer of Edith back to Peter? Also, is Quentin Beck even his real name? Because how did Fury not run a background check on him and find out that he's the guy who worked for Tony and he's not actually from a different Earth? Can Mysterio ever fight on the fly? Is that a thing that can happen or no? And how much of it needs to be pre-rendered? They had the rehearsal scene, which is actually really cool. I think Jake Gyllenhaal stole that performance. It is really cool that the Vulture, his job was to scavenge, and then Tony kicked him out, so he became a scavenger villain named Vulture. And then Quentin Beck was a illusion technologist for Tony, and then Tony fired him, so he became an illusion villain called Mysterio. So I just started thinking, we have to think about who else Tony wronged in his past, and that person will probably be the villain in Spider-Man 3, and their backstory will probably imply who they're going to become, and I bet it'll be a shocker. Or the Sinister Six. The marketing team definitely pulled one over us with the whole multiverse thing in the trailer. Not a fan about that, but also a fan because it made me not predict what was happening. Which, maybe that's the future of marketing, to just lie to people. And then Peter dropped MJ while he was swinging, and it abruptly ended the movie, which was oh, we're done? But it's because the mid-credits scene is the continuation of that exact scene. They keep going and then they explain so much more that happened. So the mid-credit scene is essentially the end of the movie, with the post-credit scene being what's to come next in MCU. Also at the end, why did Flash's mom not show up? I started thinking, oh, that's really out of place and it feels a little sad, especially for the very ending of a movie. So I started thinking, is he supposed to be the next Harry Osborn? His parents are super rich and his mom was supposed to show up, but a chauffeur ended up showing up. And then the mid-credit scene, apparently Mysterio might not be dead because he leaked footage to, get this, thedailybugle.net, which is a kind of spin on the Daily Bugle, but now making it more modernized by keeping it like an online reporting service or agency. And they have Jonah Jameson who came back, and he is played by J.K. Simmons, and my theater erupted. We were like, yeah! Because it's so cool that they brought a previous guy back into this movie, and there were talks about maybe having Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man shake Tom Holland's Spider-Man's hand in this movie, because we thought this was initially going to be about the multiverse. Mysterio twisted the situation to say that Spider-Man actually was the villain, that the people of New York and people everywhere would not trust Spider-Man as much, so it's like a PR problem. But then it became a massive problem. You have to stay and watch the mid and end credit scene. They're just phenomenal. They're the reason why you leave this movie feeling really good about it, even though the first half is kind of really slow. Mysterio looks at the camera, he's like, Spider-Man's secret identity is he... and it gets like staticky. You're like, oh my gosh, he almost said it. And then right before the movie ends, it's just like, Peter Parker! And it shows his face, it shows Spider-Man go, what? And everyone was just like, oh! Because this really just ups the ante for Spider-Man 3. We don't know which villain's gonna be in it, but now he has to really tackle personal life versus professional life as a 16-year-old. Wow, so good, so good. Like, really just pushing the envelope of what they're going to be held responsible to in the MCU, which is a good thing to do coming off the heels of Endgame, because everyone thought, oh, this is such high stakes. Now we know this movie has set up really high stakes for the Spider-Man movies that come in the future. And then the post-credit scene showed us that Maria Hill and Nick Fury are both Skrulls from Captain Marvel's movie. They also kind of dropped hints throughout the movie that Nick Fury and Maria Hill weren't actually Nick Fury and Maria Hill, because in the beginning, when they were in Mexico, in the very first scene where Mysterio shows up against the Elemental, she calls him Nick, and we know from Captain Marvel that no one calls him Nick. When Mysterio says, you can be really helpful on my planet, Peter's like, what do you mean on your planet? And then Nick Fury says, he's not from your Earth. And they show Nick Fury, he's like on a vacation, which turns out to be another illusion. This whole movie's about illusions. And he's just really on a spaceship where there are a bunch of Skrull walking around, and clearly he's in charge. And it looks like it's a spaceship, kind of like the Watchtower from DC, but this one is probably going to be called SWORD from the comics, which is S.H.I.E.L.D. was an organization that dealt with Earth threats. This is kind of an intergalactic threat agency. It kind of lets you know the future of MCU in Phase 4 and Phase 5. All in all, I would rate this movie an 8.5 out of 10. What would you rate it? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed it, tell me why. If you did not enjoy it, tell me why not. And as always, be safe, be strong, be swag. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video. You can watch some more right now. Make sure to like and subscribe. See, I didn't forget. Bye!